Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you had a good lunch break, got to stretch your legs or check your email. Um, Hopefully some food as well. We'll get started in just about 2 minutes. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. We may have some people joining us for the next couple minutes as you're coming back from lunch, but I want to go ahead and get started with our next session. So today we have Ann Pemberton from UNCW. She is the Associate Director of Research and Instructional Services and Library Assessment at UNCW. And she's going to be leading us through a workshop on work styles. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Ann. And I am in the chat. If anyone has tech issues or questions, I'm happy to help.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's good to see everyone, or at least see your name in a box. So it's good to be here. So does everybody see the PowerPoint? Hopefully. Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna attempt to talk about work styles and try to build off of our great previous sessions about collaboration. And I would say I probably have more questions than I do answers, which I know everyone hates when a presenter says that, but it's true. So hopefully we'll have some time to discuss some things throughout this. So yeah, so you may have heard my dogs a second ago. These are my office mates, Chance, Storm, Gracie, and Sky. And so I cannot guarantee that they will not start barking really loudly. So if you see me go to mute and turn my video off, that is because I have kicked them out of the room. So just thank you for your patience with that. But they're happy to be here too. So what I'm hoping to do is talk about what is a work style, how can it be identified, and how can we use work styles to improve our teams. And what I'm not really going to talk about, but what I would love to talk about in the future is how work style is related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm also going to focus on how work styles are important for your current team. I'm not going to talk about how inventories and work styles might be important in terms of recruitment and hiring. So those are some, pretty big topics that I'm not covering. And all related to that is this idea of fit, which is like Facebook, it's complicated. you know, just reflecting a lot on this particular topic, you know, I do worry that I might be kind of leaning on that side of like how you'll know that you're fitting in with your group when a lot of times that equals I want to work with people exactly like me, and that is not at all what I'm recommending or suggesting. So maybe for another day, another mini conference, we can tackle some of these topics. So just to give you some context, I'm at UNC-Wilmington in Wilmington, North Carolina. So if you're new to North Carolina or just haven't been the length of the state, there's a map. We're in the southeast corner. So we're about an hour north of Myrtle Beach, if that gives you a little perspective. And we have one library for our campus, Randall Library, and there's a picture there. So UNCW has almost 18,000 students. So we have been growing steadily throughout the years. The library has been growing, but not quite as much. We're trying to keep pace, but we have about 60 full-time library employees. And the way that we're structured, there are 5 associate directors that report to our university librarian. And so I'm one of those 5 associate directors. And so I oversee research and instructional services. And there are, including me, there are 11 of us. And so that emoji, crazy emoji heart graphic, that really, and some of my colleagues are here, they can probably attest to this. This is me, like every day. Like I love what I do. I love my team, but I'm crazy at the same time. So that, I think that emoji is pretty symbolic of how I operate as an associate director. And then there are 3 people who report to me directly. So we have an outreach and engagement librarian, and then we have a coordinator of instructional services and a coordinator of liaison librarian services. So it's a little lopsided, as you can tell. Everyone used to report to me. So this is a little better, but for our coordinator of liaison librarian services, she has 6 librarians reporting to her. And so we do what typical research and instructional services departments at academic libraries do: information literacy instruction, outreach and engagement through programming, and events, exhibits. All the liaison librarians are in this department. Research assistants for students, faculty, the community. We do collection development and management. So that's what my team does. So I just thought it would help to give you a little bit of context of where I'm coming from. And when I started at UNCW almost 18 years ago, it was an entry-level position. So I have gained more responsibilities as the years have gone by. So I thought first, what we might do is if you could put into chat, what is your work style and how do you know what it is? And if you have no idea, that is a perfectly acceptable. Yes, Amy Chaotic. Guy walking around, yeah. Collaborative, teamwork, collaborator. Friendly, assigner, I like that. So for those of you answering, tell me how you know that. How do you know that you are a communicator or an assigner, or that you're people-centric? These are awesome. So this is kind of what I had hoped, is that people would be sort of descriptive and not have a one specific word that encompasses your entire work style. So this is great. Okay, and some Carol saying that you were told that you're good at it. Yeah, so we get input from other people, and then also self-reflection. And so I'm going to talk about those two things as well. Okay, so thank you. So I should know my work style, right? Like I should know that. And I say here kind of. It's like all of these other questions that are out there. What is your leadership style? What is your personality type? What is your learning style? What is your love language? What is your spirit animal? Like there's just all these questions. And for some of them, like learning style, there really isn't a distinct set of learning styles. And that's the same for work styles. So this is not scientific, but there are a gazillion definitions of work styles. So if you were to go to Google and, see if you can find an exact definition, it'll be really difficult because people think of it in different ways. Sort of traditionally, when people talk about work styles, they're often talking about personality traits and how those personality traits impact the people around you at work. And so in this presentation, it may seem that I'm kind of at the same time saying it's really, really important to understand work styles, but I'm also at the same time saying that is not, there's no exact science. This is not, there's this one inventory that you should do and it's, it's the one. I'm not saying that at all. So if it seems like I'm kind of waffling a little bit on the topic, that's because I am, because I feel like the psychology of the workplace is hugely, hugely important. But I also think you understand that through lots of different ways. And psychology, my bachelor's is in psychology. I've always been interested in it. In 2008, one of the first articles I ever published was about personality traits in librarianship, if you want to check it out. It's very dated, but so just to give you a sense, this is something I'm just really, really interested in. So you probably know, you've probably heard of a lot of these. There's a lot of different tools that supposedly help you figure out your personality traits and therefore help you figure out your work style. So these are just a few. The ones that are highlighted at the top are the most frequently used across higher education, corporate. So those are the kind of three big ones. And then there are companies where this is what they do for you. If you want to hire them, they will put together, kind of a package of assessments and inventories, and then work with you to explain what they mean and how your team can work better based on your results. So these are just a few. So Truity, True Colors, Forte, there's a bunch. And the slides are going to be shared. So I do have links to a lot of things where it may look just like a graphic. I do have a link there. Thanks for the citation. Thank you. Are there any others that people have used that aren't on this list? You want to put that in chat? These are just some that I'm vaguely familiar with or very familiar with. So if there's any that you know of, if you want to share in chat, that's great. So the results, so this is just, this to me, I know Lisa Coates, I know this is stressing you out because it's visual, but you get these results and every single inventory is different, right? So some are circles and some have different colors and some are charts. And so I mean, this is just a few of the inventory result reports. And then if we go back and look at that list, you know, those were just a few of the inventories. You see how overwhelming it all is, and how do you know which one is right for you? And some of them are just so complex. So what I'm going to attempt to do is talk about kind of more at a foundational level. What are these things trying to get at? And how can we as leaders or team members, how can we identify traits in ourselves and appreciate the traits in others, and be the best collaborators that we can be? So just if you're remotely curious, this is my Forte communication style report, which my favorite thing in here, where is it? Oh, she likes to dress well. Interesting that could come from me answering questions. So there's just, I don't know, there's a lot that's interesting here. And then some of you are probably familiar with Clifton Strengths. It used to be Strengths Finder. So I put my strengths in the corner there if you're curious. So here are some things to consider if you are thinking about work styles, you're thinking about possibly using one of these instruments, one of these assessment tools. The whole industry, the whole psychometric industry, it's a $2 billion industry. So it's not a far leap to say that therefore there is some shadiness built within it. So it is, you know, for profit. And almost all of these tools cost money for an individual. They would also cost money if you were to take them as an organization. So money is definitely a factor. There are definitely articles and books that indicate that not all of these inventories, I would suggest maybe most of them, are not based in science. So that, you know, that's a question mark, obviously. And when we kind of fixate on personality traits, it makes us as leaders, I think, put the focus on the people we work with rather than ourselves and what we need to be doing. So that's definitely a consideration. Lots of people have found that they get different results. They take it one day and then take it 3 weeks later, and they get a different result. People change over time as well, so that's a factor. You know, people grow and they learn and they have new experiences, and that impacts how they answer questions. And, you know, as humans, we just don't fit neatly into a box. And that's what these inventories are trying to do. And there's sort of this labeling that goes along with that. So at UNCW in the library, this has been 2 or 3 years now, but the whole library did Strengths Finder. And so for a few months after that, you know, people were able to kind of recall, like, oh, you're an influencer, or you, and so that's not always comfortable to be labeled, you know, in a certain way. And, you know, the questions can be invasive. You know, how would you react in this very specific situation? And that can make people really uncomfortable. So there's definitely a lot to consider when you're thinking about these inventories or talking about these inventories. And I put 2 resources that I have found really helpful. One is a book, Personality Isn't Permanent. And then Harvard Business Review did a really interesting article called The New Science of Teamwork. Actually, it's a set of articles. So there's more information there. So this is kind of my way of looking at work style. So this is not an exact definition, but this is based on my experience and what I've read. Also based on all the mistakes I have made as a leader throughout the years. This is sort of how I would conceptualize work style. And it's basically your successful strategies that you use at work to be productive, to be effective, plus all the things that make you you. So your you-ness, so your personality traits, your experiences, your culture, all of those things, all the things that make you you. And those things kind of in combination, and we're talking about work specifically, when you have an understanding of how you can be at your best as a leader, as a team member, as an employee, when you understand that about yourself and others, you can really thrive, and the people around you can thrive. So again, I've mentioned a couple times, this is obviously not an exact science. And there are certainly other conceptualizations of work style that are out there, but to move us forward, this is what we're going to work with. Okay. So why is any of this important at all? You know, you could say, I mean, isn't this just, you're just getting to know your coworkers? Like, I don't, you know, what else is there to do? And that's true. I mean, you are getting to know your colleagues over time, but I've definitely learned from experience that had I asked some more pointed questions about people's work styles, that I could have avoided conflict. I could have made individuals' work lives better had I known enough to know to ask certain questions. So you may not want to wait, you know, 5, 10 years, however long it might take to really get to know someone. You might want to, especially as a leader, ask some questions, get to know people. I also think understanding work style can help create psychological safety. There are articles coming out now about how to create psychological safety with remote working. So I will definitely be reading some of those because we're in a different world. My colleagues know that I like to bring snacks to meetings, and, you know, it's a whole kind of fun thing. And now we're in Zoom. So how do we replicate some of those things? It also, having an understanding of work styles also helps create a common language for people to be able to discuss their preferences, their traits. You know, how do people experience certain things? How do people prefer to work? It gives you the ability to see how someone else might be perceiving something, or it gives you that appreciation that people are different. So there's no right or wrong. There's just differences. And I think having that appreciation helps you better understand when there are people, I'm saying here, kindred spirits. So you might have 2 or 3 people on your team that are the best of friends. And then you may have people that just, they just don't vibe together. It just isn't, they just don't gel. And so as a leader, I find it really important to understand that. And by no means do I understand it fully. There's no way that I can possibly understand every aspect of every person that I work with, but I do feel like I have a better sense of that than maybe I did a few years ago. Cognitive and creative diversity is often a result or an outcome of understanding work styles. You can kind of balance out your team a little better. You can also better understand when people need to work independently. And I would say that is something that I struggle with a lot because I love working with people. I often forget to stop and realize that some people work more effectively independently. So that's something else to consider. It also, understanding work styles, it helps you be a leader for everyone and not just people with traits that are similar to yours. That has been a hard lesson that I have learned, is that because I am organized and because I can at times be obsessed with work, that does not mean that everyone else should have those same characteristics. And in fact, it's probably best that they don't. So that's something that I have learned throughout the years. It also, understanding people's work styles, it also helps you as a leader give people the tools they need to succeed. And so I have some examples here specifically about meetings. And this is something that I am still reminding myself of, that people need time to read things and let it sink in and kind of brainstorm on their own before it's discussed in a meeting. People want to know, how much time are we going to talk about this? Is this going to be, you're going to just mention this for 5 minutes? Are we going to have a thorough discussion? I have recently learned I need to do a much better job of preparing people if I want them to speak at a meeting. So if there's an agenda item, I will often just say, I'll just use Lisa, like, Lisa, can you chime in here? Not everyone is comfortable with that. They want to know if they're going to be asked to talk about something to prepare. People need the opportunity to communicate outside of meetings as well. So those are some examples specific to meetings, but there's definitely, other areas in which you can help people be successful by being aware of their work style. Just getting to know your team. So this is an example. So Lisa, I keep using Lisa Coates, but she is an awesome colleague, and I'm just going to keep using her as an example. So I guess it's been a year and a half, we did this massive deselection of our bound periodicals, which took up about 1/5 of our first floor of our library. We have 2 floors. And I was in our senior leadership team meeting discussing it. And it was very much kind of top down. This has got to get done. This has got to get done. Do it, do it, do it. And I knew in my gut, I knew that I needed to give a couple people more headspace than that. to be comfortable with this process. And I did not follow my instinct. And I just kind of, to the whole group, said, here's this project, we're doing it, it needs to be done. And it bit me in the butt. And I knew, looking back, I knew there were a couple of people who just needed to like talk through it. And I didn't give them the space to do that. So that's a lesson learned in not only knowing your team, but then following through and giving them what they need to be successful. I also think understanding work styles gives you some space to disagree. It's not as personal when you're disagreeing about an approach to something. Like, I think we need an hour to discuss this. I think we can talk about it in 5 minutes. So when you're kind of aware of people's approaches and preferences, when you disagree, it's much more factual. It's not a personal attack against someone. And I mentioned I love psychology, so all this work style stuff is fun for me, at least. Hopefully it's somewhat fun for other people on my team. So here's kind of a like dream scenario, or it's my dream scenario. So what if, as a leader and within your team, what if you talked about what is the most important thing for you all to understand about each other, to be productive, to be effective, to be fulfilled? What if you talked about that and just set aside time to have that discussion? What if you and your team members were self-aware? So what if people on your team were able to say, here's how I tend to think about things, or I really need time to read this before we discuss it, or I tend to babble, and if you could help me with that. So just being self-aware. And I have to say that my team, people are very self-aware and will say, even if it's a mood issue, like, I'm not in a great mood today, here's what's going on. So I'm very, very fortunate, because I think it makes our group more productive, but also, more satisfied with work in general. And then as leaders, what if we were self-aware and we were able to understand how we're being perceived? So all of these things, I think this is realistic. It's not just a dream scenario. These things can become reality, I think, really with some reflection and asking the right questions. So I've got that here. This stuff takes time. It takes energy. You see, I got my little 2020 dumpster fire going in the corner. Maybe now is not the time to figure out people's work styles. Maybe now is the most important time to figure out people's work styles. So, it's a balance. I know, as a leader, I feel like I'm always putting out a fire. All my plans for the day almost always get pushed aside by, some emergency. So I'm sure many of you feel like that. But long term, this is definitely something that if you do put in the time, that you're going to see the benefits for sure. So these are some things that I think, might be important to identify in yourself and in your team. So how are you able to be most productive? How are you able to focus? So I have people in my group who need to set aside hours that they check email, and then other people who have their email open all day. So different things work for different people. How do you best communicate? That's been really interesting. I'm a very kind of flowery email person where, hi, Susie, I hope everything's going well. And it has taken me a little while to adjust to people who, you know, just in an email say, I need this file. And they're not wrong, I'm not right, it's just a difference. So communication is important. How do people collaborate? Or, you know, do they work best independently? Are they better in a small group? Are they great at leading a big team? So what are their strengths? I think it's important for us as leaders, for anyone, to really acknowledge how open they are to grow. So are you open to feedback? Are you open to criticism? None of that is fun. That's, you know, nobody likes to have those conversations, but they're important. What is your physical environment like, especially now? You know, I have people who are thriving working from home, and it's ideal. And then there's others that, you know, they have a lot of distraction and it's difficult. So thinking about the environment is important too. And what are your values? So I'm a huge fan of identifying your values. And so I put a link here. This is just one of many, they're called value card sorts. So you pick from a whole bunch of different values like autonomy, power, humor, all these different values, and you kind of identify what are the things that are most important to you. And I think when you do that for yourself, it's important, but it can also be hugely important to understand other people's values. How do people react to stress? You know, do they tend to just completely shut down? Do they go silent? Do they start calling in sick? You know, what is the reaction there? Oh, and the values link is on the slide, so you'll have that when those get sent out. Thinking about just your previous experience, so both in terms of your work experience, but your personal experience. If you have survived a trauma, you may not want to share those details with your supervisor, but you might want to at least talk about how that trauma impacts you on a day-to-day basis at work. And implicit bias, that is hugely important to understand in ourselves, for sure. So these are some areas that I think if you can start to identify and also be able to articulate what these mean for you, you can really start improving in your team, building that psychological safety within your group. Okay, so how do you actually go about doing this? So there are definitely, I think, some good inventories that you could start with. So I like the Clifton strengths. I think the focus on your strengths is positive. I like it. I'm not saying it's for everybody by any means, but you can shop around and see what inventories are out there, and see if you're, say, at a university, does your university already have licenses for a particular instrument? Could you get a grant or some kind of external funding to pay for your team to take the inventory? Would your administration be willing, you know, on a one time, you know, or once every 3 years to pay for people to take it? I would definitely be cautious of free tools. Your library people, I know I don't need to say that, but just, you know, there's so many little quizzes out there, and so just be cautious with with those. You know, maybe in your community you have an expert on team building, or someone who, you know, focuses on personality traits or work styles that you could bring in and talk to your group. Maybe there's a book circle that you could start, or read articles together. And I put during work time, I think it's important to make sure that this is something that's part of people's workload and not something on top of what they're already doing. So not to ask someone to participate in a book circle and just say, well, you know, you'll just have to do that on your own time. So try to incorporate it into work. And really kind of what it boils down to is asking questions and acknowledging imperfection in yourself. I am so imperfect. I have so many flaws, but I don't think I could have acknowledged that 15 years ago. You know, I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to do everything right. And so some of that has come with age, and some of that has just come from research and reading, and you know, working with other leaders and seeing how they operate. So really, it's, you know, asking questions and being okay with having uncomfortable discussions. So here are some potential questions that you could start with individuals on your team or your team as a whole. You know, when do you thrive? So under what conditions do you feel like you are able to thrive? We have some people on our team who are early morning people, and we have some people on our team who 10 a.m. is the start of their day. And to me, that's great. As long as I know, you know, we'll figure it out. We'll make it work. What exhausts you? How do you respond to stress? What makes you feel appreciated? What irks you about me? What irks you about your colleagues? What are some other questions that come to mind that either you've posed to your team before, or that you, based on our discussion so far, that you might want to ask that you think would be important? So if you want to put that in chat, that would be great. And then what does this actually look like? So this is what it kind of looks like for my team specifically. So I mentioned that the whole library did the Clifton Strengths. I've encouraged people to take the implicit association test, the Harvard tests. We've got someone coming who is an instructor on campus to talk about implicit bias in a couple weeks. We're using a meeting to do that. It's not extra. It's built into our regular meeting. We've done lots of cool team building activities. So one, I had diffused the burrito. It's called diffuse the bomb, but we were in, you know, in the library in an open space, and we didn't want to freak anyone out. So we just kept referring to the bomb as the burrito. So that was fun. Recently, one of my colleagues, Eva, had this awesome idea to share in a picture, one picture, what 2020 is like. And so that was fun. And it gave me insight into how people were feeling, how, what level of stress are people feeling. We've had sessions where I've just called them angst sessions, where we just, if you think it would be useful, just to come and talk about all the insanity of 2020. And we also have an amazing library-wide team that has planned and carried out a bunch of library-wide team building activities, which has been amazing. And again, asking questions. I'm very much, sometimes I need to reflect and take a little time. And so someone may say something in a meeting, and it might be a week later that I might go to them and just say, what was going on with that? Is there anything that I can do? And just talk through it. And again, the acceptance of, we are not perfect. We're all humans. Some of this stuff annoys the crap out of people. Like, oh my gosh, are you really asking me to talk about this stuff? I've got 10,000 guides to update. I don't have time for this. And just acknowledging that that's okay too. That it can be annoying to people. So I've talked a little bit about some of the lessons that I've learned. One is to be flexible, but to also have boundaries. And I think somebody talks about that in chat. Yeah, being clear about your needs and your boundaries. That don't text me at 1 a.m, even though you're up. And then how, but how can you be flexible with people, understanding how people communicate and how they work best. I think the biggest lesson that I've learned just in general as a librarian is that everyone is different. And just because someone is not talking in a meeting does not mean that they're not paying attention. It doesn't mean they're not thinking. It doesn't mean they're not reflecting. And the same for our students. So for those of us in colleges and universities, when we teach, our students have zero affect. They just stare at us. And that is something that's really hard to adjust to if you're someone like me who's very talking with my hands and has a lot of facial expression. So just understanding people are different and they express themselves in different ways. I have also learned that there are things that I see as a discussion that other people view as conflict. And that is definitely something that I have got to work on, is recognizing when someone is seeing something as a conflict and potentially shutting down, whereas I think we're having a discussion. So that's definitely something I need to figure out. And so I'll let you know, probably after I retire, I will figure it out. So really quickly, I want to be sure there's time for questions and comments. These are just a couple of assessments that I'm exploring, that the concepts are interesting to me. So one is this business chemistry that Deloitte came up with. And then there's another company called Neuro Color. So this is the business chemistry, and it kind of groups people into these categories. But I thought this might be something that I could use to say, circle the things that apply to you. And then we could just start a conversation with that. So I like this second chart. What are you energized by? What alienates you? So I think this is helpful as a starting point for discussion. I'm also getting more and more interested in how working remotely is affecting people. So this same company, they have this chart, and like in the very first box in Pioneer, pioneers are particularly likely to get stir crazy in this environment, both mentally and physically. Anything that can serve as an outlet for their thoughts and creativity can help harness their energy productively. So, you know, I can ask my team, like, what do you relate to this? So I don't think I'm ever going to be able to afford to hire Deloitte to come in and work with our team, but there are themes from their assessment that I think could be useful to start a conversation. Neuro Color is another thing that really interests me. They have a lot of good articles, and it's really about the combination of culture and temperament. So they really focus a lot on the brain and how the brain actually operates. So I'm very fascinated by that. So that's another thing that I'd like to explore a little more. Okay, so what questions do you have, or takeaways, or anything at all? I would love, as I said at the very beginning, I have many more questions than I do answers about this topic. So I would love to hear from you all. Anything that has helped you, lessons learned, any of that good stuff. And while you all are thinking, I'm going to put this, we have a free event at UNCW coming up related to mindfulness. So I'll leave this up here while you ponder your questions. So any insight into following through and persistence? Yeah, I mean, I definitely, as I said before, I think one of the biggest frustrations that I have as a leader or manager is putting out fires and not really thinking long term. So one thing that I have tried, it has not always been successful, is on my calendar, my Outlook calendar, I might have, you know, an invitation basically with myself to reflect or to read or plan an activity, so that at least I'm trying to get that kind of part of my regular workflow. I think a lot of people hate these tests. So yeah, you're not the only one. I mean, there's some of the questions are so bizarre and annoying. And so I think there are probably more people in this call that hates them than likes them. So again, it's just sort of, you know, what can you take from each inventory to start a conversation, and not necessarily, you know, require someone to take the actual inventory themselves. Yeah, I definitely think just learning about your colleagues is so important, whether you're a leader or not. Just understanding how someone might interpret something or someone might experience something differently. I think it's hugely important. Anybody have an idea for an icebreaker to help people get comfortable? TED Talks are great. Yeah, it doesn't always, it could be showing a video, showing a TED Talk. and trying to make time to then have a discussion about that. One boring fact about yourself. Amy, I'd like to know that boring fact. Put that
I drive a black car.
You drive a black car? I dig it. Yeah, an assumption that I made, I will share. So and this person does not work at UNCW anymore, so I think it's okay for me to share. I had assumed that someone who, to me, did not seem engaged in meetings by the lack of them talking or kind of their body language. I, for a long time, thought this person was not engaged. And I was very frustrated with it. And then I decided in a one-on-one meeting to bring up some of the discussion points from our team group meeting. And I was amazed at how engaged they actually were, how they were listening, how they thought about things that were discussed. And I wish I had talked to that person sooner, because I think it may have been a different kind of work relationship. So I think because I am talkative, beyond talkative, because I'm not afraid to kind of bust into a conversation, that I had just assumed that if you're interested, you're going to talk. And that was just completely off base. Okay, so lots of good stuff in chat. I know we're getting almost to 2 o'clock. So thank you so much. This has been great. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everything that you're saying in chat. I hope you can attend this mindfulness talk, the state of the science. I'd love to see you there. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. We really appreciate it. And I will be sharing these slides, as Anne mentioned. You'll get an email with the slides, links to the recordings, so you'll be able to go back and refer to anything that was mentioned in the chat or during the presentations. And we do have a couple more minutes if there are any last minute questions or comments. But other than that, this is the last sort of regular session for today's workshop. We do have a networking hour coming up next. That is a limited attendance session, so you should have been directly contacted by me if you registered in time to be included in that session. So we're trying to keep the numbers small so we actually get a chance to talk with each other. But we will have future opportunities for things like networking and getting to know each other. So if you missed this one, don't worry, there'll be more. But if you could all just join me in thanking